So Jesper, I am so thrilled to have you on the Sales Transformation Podcast. It's been a while trying to get you onto the podcast. I think we've been in conversation for some time, but it's a super welcome for you to join us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil.
I just, for the benefit of the listeners, I'd just like to give you a little bit of the context that Jesper has been one of our master's students over the past years, and now an alumni. And we have a particular type of podcast, which is the master podcast series within the Sales Transformation Podcast, where we give students a chance to be able to go into some of the detail of what they've researched as a contribution to the learning that we can get as a broader profession. So I'm really, really excited, Jesper, to have you as an alumni also of the Leading Sales Transformation MSc program that you've been attending. Okay, so Jesper's interest and the topic of his research was around the importance of mindset. But before we go into Jesper's kind of project, I think you'd all like to know a little bit more about his background and how he's come now to be the managing director of IFS in Denmark. So Jesper, I wonder if you could just tell us a bit more about who you are and what your journey has been in your professional capacity in sales.
Sure, Phil. And first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this podcast. I would say it was an aspiration almost from day one when I met you at the first course when I started the MSc. So I'm really pleased that you invited me. So a bit of background on myself. So I would actually build it up because that leads into my research and my whole sort of fascination for mindset, if that's okay. So if we go back, so my late teens, I didn't believe in myself. I didn't believe in my capacity. So even though I did well in school, I didn't think I had it in me to study further. I just didn't think I had the capacity, basically. So I started working. I was shy, introvert until mid-20s. But I also had an aspiration to go into sales. So I thought that's not really a good cocktail. So I need to do something. So I actually started to do a bachelor in marketing after working hours while working in an insurance company. And that sort of opened my eyes. Okay, I actually have the capacity to go beyond what I thought in my intellectual level. Learned a lot, and it was really inspiring for me. That sort of catalyst or sort of moved me into sales. I got my first sales pitch on stage for 25 people, and I was dead scared. But afterwards, I found out it was not scary. It was fun, and I really enjoyed it. So I worked hard with myself, sort of being extrovert instead of introvert. And now I can't help myself talking to strangers in the supermarket, and my kids hate me when I do that. So that's sort of a little bit of my transformation. And then moving into work. So after having my first few sales roles, I was then offered to become MD of an insurance company, interim. I just had baby twins, so my wife was thrilled. I called her and I said that maternity leave I was going on, I'm not going. I'm going to be an MD. So, but that was a good experience. Then I sort of stepped back from leadership for some years, working at SAP as an account manager. But then via a startup, I came back and had a Nordic, I was Nordic head of financial services at SAP, and then offered to be heading up sales in Denmark, which I came from latest. So I was in that role for 5 years. And then I was having the great opportunity of moving to IFS 1st of August last year and becoming the MD of IFS Denmark. And I just love the culture. So that is also connected sort of to the mindset, you can say. Yeah.
That's a fantastic kind of journey that you had, and it's so interesting that you describe yourself as an introvert. I don't think that came across to me quite so strongly since I've known you. So, and
I'm not anymore, by the way.
I'm too extrovert. I get that. Talking to strangers in supermarkets. That's a great story. But I tell you what is interesting for me, just that statement about being an introvert, but then moving into sales. It's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? And I wonder what it was about you as an introvert that kind of pushed yourself into doing something that's counterintuitive? Because like you say, salespeople are normally associated with being extrovert. I know that's not always the case, but
Yeah.
you must have had this, I don't know, this pushing attitude from a very young age to put yourself into situations of being slightly uncomfortable.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I would say at first it was a fascination of looking at salespeople. They always got the credits, they got the fancy parking slots, etc. So that was the beginning of it. But then when I actually started really enjoying the impact you can have on your customers and how they run their businesses.
Yeah.
And it's just been building up. So basically for me, my inner motivation has changed completely from back then. Back then it was about me, myself, and not Irene, but myself again. And now I'm actually motivated by making other people successful, being my staff, being my wife, my kids, and customers. So that's what really drives me. So you can say it was something different in the beginning, but I found out my inner motivation was different than I thought. It was not the big fancy car or the parking lot. It was making an impact for others, basically.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, so I guess on that topic, we can come back to the, the topic of your kind of research. And one of the questions, do you want to read out the title of your research? I mean, I'm very happy to do it, but I think maybe it comes from you because you were the one that wrote the project. So what was the title?
It's actually quite a long title, but or it's actually the research question. So, and it goes like this: in the light of people's mindset being so important for success and development of the individuals and companies, does leaders understand the value of the mindset of their staff and what role it plays in the company's success?
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a fantastically interesting title, and I think so many people kind of do talk about mindset. I mean, we talk about it, as you know, Jesper, an awful lot in the work that we do. But I wonder if we can talk about what this word means to you. What is the word mindset? When you talk about mindset, what are you talking about here?
Yeah. Can I take just one step back and actually say why I came across why I started working with this, or should we save that for later?
No, go on. Yeah.
Okay, so what was working in software companies for many years, but also having the MD role in other businesses, I saw so many transformations never really happen. So companies buy an IT system, they implement, and then they think they've transformed. But they have not transformed. They have a new IT system. So it's about changing the way we work completely.
Yeah.
And that transformation, companies cannot transform unless their employees transform. So if we then take sort of a parallel into Carol Dweck, who was one of sort of the pioneers in growth mindset, I'll come back to mindset. So she did some research saying that only 40% of adults have a growth mindset. So
staggering, isn't it? I mean,
it's
I noticed that stat, and that is that surprised me, I must say, having read it again in your paper. 40%. Yeah.
And then if you then extrapolate that and say, okay, it's probably a fair statement for most companies. That means that we need to transform how we work, but only 40% of our staff believe that they can work differently and learn new skills.
Yeah.
So that's a recipe for disaster. So that's actually how I came into working with mindset. Then I started reflecting with my mentor, with my friends, some elite sports people, etc. And what is mindset is many different things, and that's also why I broadened my research, not only thinking of one thing like growth mindset, but more broad. But just my own interpretation that goes back to my introduction is that growth mindset means that you believe that you can develop yourself, you can develop your intelligence, and you can learn new skills no matter where you are in your life. Not saying that everybody can be world champions of everything, but we always have more capacity than we believe ourselves.
Right.
So that's sort of a growth mindset.
Yeah.
Then you have the leader's mindset from Maori. So that's more about leaders having a mindset. It's also about a growth mindset, but it's also something different, that they have the mindset that we can change the business we're in. So
Right.
there are many definitions of mindset.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think overall, I think Carol Drake actually nailed it pretty well. So even though
Okay.
we call it different things,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
has some similarities, I would say.
Yeah. Okay.
Hmm.
So that's fantastic. So you've set out on your quest for investigating, this question about mindset, and you've so far linked it to this notion of transformation. It's interesting. It sort of started from a view of looking at what it is you were selling, effectively, like digital transformation, and this stat that most transformation initiatives fail, but it sort of broadened into a sort of wanting to investigate from a leadership point of view.
Hmm.
What does a deeper understanding of what it takes to transform have for leadership? And I guess it would spill back into the customer conversations as well, because every time you talk about a digital transformation, that part of your solution somehow, I guess, needs to address the leadership aspect of managing a digital transformation project. Is that correct? Is that now part of?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. It
Okay.
actually goes back to a discussion we had in one of your lessons about third box thinking.
Oh
So
yeah.
taking it sort of externalize your internal capabilities. And
Yeah.
that also, I think, ties and it ties a little bit back to your own research about being tactful, working with tactful audacity, that you are allowed to challenge the customer if you can actually articulate it well enough and have the
Yeah.
trust and
Yeah.
so yeah, so no doubt about that. And I actually use it because when we sell our software solutions, it requires a transformation. So actually, I
Yeah.
quite quickly started adopting that. I also, in the discussions with customers, to the CIOs and CFOs, have the discussion, say you need to make sure you do the change management, and otherwise, I'm
Yeah.
not really interested in selling you software, because then you will see it as a failure. Even though the
Yeah.
implementation succeeded, you got a new
Yeah.
IT system, but you failed, and I
Yeah.
don't want to set you up for failure. And that's
Yeah.
an interesting discussion. And then you start thinking about a third box, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
It's so interesting. Okay, so let's come back more into the process of your research and the journey that you went on, because I know that, and you've already mentioned some of the people that have influenced you, and you've talked about Carol Dweck and Maori, and perhaps there were others. Um,
Mm.
but I wonder if you can just again sort of illustrate who were the biggest influences for you as you went about your research into this topic before you did your research yourself.
Yeah. So actually, before I sort of formulated the problem statement,
Yeah.
I thought I would research mindset, but
Okay.
I haven't really researched mindset, whether
Okay.
that's important, because the research I did was, okay, so many people has established mindset is important. So let's
Okay.
figure out, does business leaders actually understand that it's important, or the importance of it? So,
Okay.
so the journey I was on, I looked into Collins as his research. They worked for 5 years, a big team of his, analyzing successful companies and what makes them great, actually. And a huge part of that was the mindset, not defining whether it was growth mindset or a leader's mindset, etc. Then I
Okay.
started getting curious. Okay, so they researched so many companies. Okay, let's see what else is out there. You had, I'll come back to the names of these guys, but there was also another group of people that was analyzing, why does leadership training don't pay off?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was because we were training them in methodologies, etc., but we didn't train them and open their mindset and work differently than yesterday.
Okay.
And I thought,
Yeah, I found that really, really interesting. That I think you've uncovered in your research this sort of disconnect between broadly people recognizing that mindset is really important and really crucial,
mm,
but actually, uh, once people are onboarded into the company, there's very little kind of investment made into that sort of mindset kind of work.
mm,
But and I think this became the essence of your research, wasn't it? I wonder if you can then talk us through kind of what you decided to do and why you decided to do it in the way that you did, both quantitative research data, and I think you did some qualitative research as well.
Yeah, it was mainly focused on quantitative sort of research.
Yeah.
And I had long debates with myself and some of my peers. What is the best way to sort of answer my research question?
Yeah.
And basically, the way I phrased it, I needed some numeric numbers to present the answers. So the qualitative sort of feedback, I felt I wouldn't be able to answer my question. You'd get a lot of people's opinion. So I needed to get a broad set of sort of participants so I could derive the values, because then I can show that, okay, maybe we don't invest enough in mindset, because I didn't want to research, is mindset important? Everybody else, a lot of people has done that before me. So it was more getting the numbers out there. Okay, so we believe mindset is important, but do we actually invest in it? Right. So that was sort of the first discussion I had with myself.
Can I just briefly,
sure.
just to say that the numbers of people that you reached out for your research was, I think it was 79
correct
respondents, and I can say from doing my doctorate, that's a large number.
Yep.
I think I did 89 in a doctorate. You did 79 in a master's.
So I need 10 more and then I have a doctorate, Phil. No, I'm joking.
Great correlation, but we don't see that many master's students actually using such numbers for a quantitative survey. So I was first of all taken by how many people you managed to survey. Could I ask, how did you get those people to do the survey for you? I mean, how did you find the interviewees for your survey?
Yeah. So first of all, I had to narrow down what would be my sort of the group that I wanted to attack. I mean, what? Right. So I had to, based on cultural differences across the globe. So I narrowed it down to Denmark or Danish leaders living abroad. Good. Okay. Then I started sending emails directly to people and say, would you like to answer this? But I thought, how can I come up with maybe 500 people whereof 20% will answer? I thought, okay, that's not going to work. So I stopped. Said, where do I have a big population? Okay, LinkedIn. I had 2,378 connections at that time. Yeah. And it was also to avoid bias, because it's not friends. I mean, it's business relations that I met through the years. Okay, I thought, here I have a population that is big enough. Then I went through it and said, okay, I want leaders, again, working in Denmark or Danish leaders abroad. Okay. So I went line by line by line. So it took quite some late nights where my wife was saying, what are you doing, Jesper? And I said, I'm just working. But it really paid off. I mean, the first week I had two people replying based on the emails. But then when I started with the LinkedIn network, then it sort of took off. And I was actually really pleased with the numbers. So, because I thought it could have statistically significance that I had such a broad population to look at. Had I only had 10, I mean, you could have a bad day in answering that survey, and then I couldn't use the results for anything. So,
Well, I think it's very impressive, and I think it probably speaks a lot for you that you got so many people kind of responding, because people are making an investment of their time answering your questions. Okay, so we've got
just on that. So there was quite interesting to see how many replied back to me and said, Jesper, I have now answered. Could you please share your thesis or your outcomes, because we would like to see the results? And that was actually a good thing to see.
Yeah, it is. I mean, if they're giving to you, I mean, they would, of course, they would be potentially interested in your research findings.
Yep.
And so presumably you gave them, did you? You gave them an idea of what the research findings were. And I wonder if they've had a chance to comment on that yet.
No, so I haven't got the you can say the evaluation of the thesis, so I wanted
Yeah,
to
we're just
wait for that,
waiting for
and then
moderation.
yeah,
Yeah,
and then I'll start
absolutely.
sharing. So,
Yeah,
but there will be some
wonderful.
good discussions,
Yeah,
hopefully.
well, really will be. I think that
Hmm.
they'd find it really interesting.
Hmm.
Okay, so I wonder if we could hone in on the specific questions that you were wanting to get the answers to, because I think you had. I wonder if you wouldn't mind, sort of, for the listener to know what were the key questions and what were you, I guess, from those, what were the conclusions from the questions that you got?
Yeah. So at first I thought I would put out 3 questions.
Okay.
Then I actually doubled that. So I'll explain why. So I put out 6 questions. So the first question I raised was for the leaders, how do you view the importance of people's mindset in work? Then
Okay.
I thought, but maybe it's also interesting to see the leaders' view on what the company rates the importance of mindset.
Yeah.
So I asked the same question, and there was a difference. So the leaders rated at 87 points on a scale from 0 to 100, but they rated their companies at 77 out of 100. Of
Okay.
course, it's a subjective sort of opinion, but
Yeah.
on the other hand, it's a large data set that we got these
Correct.
numbers from.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Then I asked the next question: how much do you, as a leader, invest in developing your staff's mindset? And then, luckily, I also put in the next question saying, how do you view your company's investment in developing people's mindset?
Right.
And that also was interesting because then we moved from 87 in the importance to 79 in investment
Right.
for the leaders. But the company, they rated as only 66.
Yeah, that's a big difference.
It is. And then one could argue, and the good thing is now the thesis is handed in, so now I don't have to act as a researcher anymore, but I can come with a bit of opinion here also,
Yeah.
is that if so many people has established that mindset is so important for businesses, and then our leaders say that our companies only rate on 66 on a scale to 100, then there must be a problem. If we go back to the sort of the thinking I had, why so many transformations fail, because only 40% have a growth mindset. So got a little bit curious on that point, and then that built up, and also in my research, etc. Carol Drake, do we hire for mindset? I would say I've done that for many years, so I don't want to see people's resume. I want to meet them first and understand, what is their mindset, and then we can start looking at resumes, etc. It makes so much easier if we hire for mindset, because then we get the future and we don't get the past, because people could have been successful in the past without succeeding in the future. So the next question. Oh, sorry. Do you want to?
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that in itself is a very interesting comment, because I would imagine that 95% of people look at a resume and sort of interview around the resume,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe 5% do as you do and not look at the resume until they've sort of got into the mindset piece. Interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I asked, so do you as a leader hire for mindset? And they scored it at 86 out of 100. And then I asked, what about your view on your company? And they said 81 in mindset. So is that
Yeah.
big or small? And in my opinion, I think it's too low. I think we should sort of have an even bigger focus. I mean, it's like hiring a football player who has turned 35 and say, okay, he's been world champion, etc. He's won the Premier League many
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
Great. Should we hire him, or what do we need for the future? We need a talent that can build in the future and not
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
downwards.
Right.
So that was a bit of sports analogy on it.
Yeah, yeah. Because I
Hmm.
know that you mentioned you've got some within your circle of friends. You've got some elite sportsmen, and I think you've got your twins are into badminton
Yep.
as well, if I'm not mistaken. And it was interesting comment you make about your twins as well, in
Yep.
terms of talent versus potential, I suppose, as well. But yeah,
Mm.
really, really, really interesting. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So you've done the research. I suppose the basic research findings are that leaders leaders rate mindset as being highly important, but there seems to be a gap between recognizing its importance and doing something about it, with the investment piece. So whilst on the one hand, so do you have any thoughts as to why companies or leaders are not kind of, if they recognize it as being important, why aren't they, like you said earlier, creating leadership programs which focus on mindset? Why aren't they doing that in your view?
One of them is we are all so busy, so we don't
Okay.
have the time to stop and reflect and change the square wheels into the round ones. That's
Right.
a classic, I know.
Yeah.
That's one thing. The second thing is, if we extrapolate sort of Dweck's research that only 40% of adults has a growth
Yeah.
mindset, does it mean that for only 40% of leaders and business leaders has it?
Yeah.
And if so, then that makes sense why companies doesn't invest,
Right.
because if the leaders don't have a mindset in believing in it, why should they then invest? And then that comes back to the numbers that maybe people are a bit exaggerating the investments in it, but that's just me sort of stipulating here. Yeah.
So from what you inferred earlier, yes, but
Mm-hmm.
you sort of implied that it's possible to change people's mindsets,
Mm-hmm.
to develop a growth mindset. Um, could you talk a bit more about that? So when you look at because you're now the MD of IFS in Denmark, you're going to have quite a large team of people that you're sort of managing. By implication, 40% of people in your team has a fixed mindset, not a growth mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, I mean, if this is publicly broadcasted, you might not want to say you got 100% of your team have a growth mindset. But it'd be interesting to know, sort of knowing that, is how is that affecting the kind of things that you might be doing to encourage, a growth mindset with the people that are working around you? And have you had any observations of any changes that you've seen as a consequence of that?
Yeah, so I can take my business development representative. So he's done a good job, but nobody has coached him, etc., and helped him.
Yeah.
So from when I took over, and I think it's his words, is that the last 6 months he's learned more and been much more successful than the past 2 years before I joined,
Right.
because we actually spent time on developing him.
Yeah.
So what I always do with staff is I do a development plan with them. I need to understand what motivates them,
Yeah.
because if you know what motivates them and understand what they want to do with their career, then you can start looking at what's preventing them from it.
Okay. Right.
And when you know that, then you build an action plan. What do we need to do?
Yeah.
Does the BDR need to have an external mentor and a CFO to understand better what does it mean to run a business? How do they take decisions, etc.? So so 6 months into it, I'm amazed at how he's developed, and he's just gonna continue. Another guy who's just joined my team in sales. I mean, I see we only worked together for a month, and it's really interesting to see. He said, I never had sort of a leader that has taken care of my development and really interested in what I do and my success. So it doesn't take much as a leader to come in and change that.
So can I come back to this sort of 40% figure then? Do you
Mm-hmm.
think the 40% is quite low because leaders themselves aren't unlocking the potential for a growth mindset through the sort of things that you've done,
Mm-hmm.
rather than it being sort of, they've come in with this fixed mindset and they can't change? So
Yeah, that's part of the
that's part
challenge
of
we
the
have.
story, is that the 40% figure could be a self-inflicted wound in a way,
Mm-hmm.
because the leadership have not created a culture of growth mindset, which you can get from coaching, taking a personal interest in people,
Mm-hmm.
and wanting to give them the opportunity to flourish, through coaching.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the reasons why I fell in love with IFS. So at my first interview with our Nordic MD, we had like 30 minutes. It was just an introduction. And I thought, I want to work for her. So now I need to investigate the company and understand, is that the culture of the company or is it only her? But seeing that it is a culture, then that's a place I want to be, where we actually nurture people and not nurture, but nurture their mindset and develop people, you can say. So, yeah.
That's, that's really sort of really interesting.
But the self-infliction, it actually maybe goes back to the last questions I raised. If people hire for mindset, because if you don't truly do, then you get your 40% growth mindset and 60% fixed, also in your hiring process, and then you have your self-inflicted wound, as you were talking about. So
in your case, it starts right. I was curious because you've addressed the hiring process very specifically in your survey, but the figures are quite high there, aren't they? That people say that they hire for people with the right mindset. There you have a slight question mark about that, I think.
Yes. Actually, I do.
But it kind of suggests that once if you hire for mindset, you may assume you've got the right mindset. And therefore you may not focus on it because you think you have already recruited people with it.
Yep.
But it doesn't quite correlate, does it, to the other parts of your data analysis, which suggests that the companies don't invest enough in it. And the Carol Dweck figure is very interesting.
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
Again, back to the football analogy. I mean, you recruit the best players, but if you don't train them and develop them, then they will stagnate or never grow.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. So I think it's a very positive kind of story that you're actually sharing. And I'm also interested in, we talked about how you're developing your own staff with this growth mindset through individual kind of coaching. And you also spoke earlier about the way that it's affecting the third box, if you like, the customer conversations you're having. Is there any more you can share about that side of things at all, Jesper, in terms of how this is affecting your success as a company selling solutions to customers?
Yes, and it has more than one aspect to it. I think, first of all, the culture we have internally, that is contagious to the customers.
Right.
So if we have a strong and positive and good culture, then people go out to customers and it sort of rubs off on them. So they can see that it's good people we have and they behave well, but they are also working with tactful audacity, etc. But people actually listen if we have the right things to come with. So I think that whole culture thing, nurturing that and helping people develop them, that's really important. And now I lost track of your question. Sorry, could you repeat that? Sorry, Phil.
No, it was the question was around the sort of customer engagement side, and it's whether I suppose it's whether or not you've formalized your sales approach to always include a change management dimension in your sort of go-to-market strategies as a means of making sure that it's not forgotten. Because it would be quite easy, I guess, for the sales team just to go out, sort of sell their product and services, and they've hit their number, but they don't really think about the implications of a successful implementation program if they haven't got this change, sort of this change management framework at the back of their mind.
Yeah, and to avoid sort of selling functionality, features and functions, etc., we have a huge focus on selling value. So understanding the customer's business and how we can positively impact the customer's customers, basically. That's really important, and that normally derives a business case. But again, and that's back to your point, if we then don't do the change management after implementing systems or solutions or products, then you never harvest the business value.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so important
Exactly.
that we discuss both things in
Both
parallel.
things at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, you know that I absolutely sort of fascinated with this topic of mindsets, and you very kindly alluded to some of those from my own research. That it wasn't really looking at it from a growth mindset point of view. It was just from a customer point of view, what mindsets are they looking for from a selling organization?
Hmm.
Um, so it's looking at the same topic through a kind of slightly different lens. But one of the things that struck me about so, some of the research that you did, was about the importance of purpose in all of this, in having the right mindset. And I think it was through some of your literature reviews that one of the methodologies was the importance that and perhaps this is around the culture that you're now creating inside your own company, is how important purpose is to creating the right mindset.
Mm.
And I don't know if you can recall Cortagan's Onion, from that module 1 that we did
Mm.
together, where we talk about the core and then the mission and then identity. And I think I found it very interesting. What is the predeterminant of mindset? Is it having a strong purpose, which then creates the right mindset, or does the right mindset create a strong purpose? I'm not sure. It's a bit of a question mark going around in my head at the moment about, I can see the importance of purpose because it drives a call to action, and it suggests the mindsets that are, it sort of infers what mindsets you might need to have to realize your purpose.
Yeah, for me it goes, yeah, so the Kotaken discussion, then we started reading about Kotter's 8-step for
Yes.
transformation.
Yeah.
And I think that really nailed it because there was some great steps in it. But he said if you don't work from a clear vision or
Yeah.
purpose, then you will never succeed. But that's not enough. You
Yeah.
actually need to anchor it in your culture, because then you
Yeah.
start working differently.
Yeah.
So it's all tied together, I would
Yeah.
say, and it's difficult to separate it. But yeah, but it is, again, it comes back to the whole transformation part. It started with my own transformation, and now it's much more interesting to looking at other people's
Yeah.
transformation and companies' transformation. But actually, it probably also vision and purpose is not enough. I mean, if the leaders don't have the right mindset, then they will never develop the staff, and then we won't change, etc. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's really it's a really, yeah, really interesting kind of discussion. Where do you think this is going to take you? Or do you feel as though you've taken it as far as you can? You've got a very clear idea about what's required? Or do you see in your own self-development, this journey continuing?
Yeah, but I think it's more from a mentor perspective.
Right.
So I just signed up to be a mentor for leaders in my own company, etc., outside my own sort of sphere here in Denmark.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really triggers me right now. It's one thing is, make sure my own organization has the right mindset, etc., but also
Yeah.
helping others. Because again, helping a leader to change, that leader will then impact 10, 20 people.
Yeah.
So instead of
Right.
sort of taking every individual, then go a little bit higher up and helping those persons. So
Yeah.
that's what's really funny right now. In 2 years'
Yeah.
time, I don't know, but right now that's what's driving me.
What I love about the master's programs is the variety of projects that people embark upon, and as you've been talking, I've also been thinking about change, and you talked about Kotter, and you've talked about organizational change, um, and how Grant van Ulbrich, for example, has addressed change at a personal level,
Hmm.
which kind of links back into the growth mindset, and as an alumni developed the scared so what framework.
Hmm.
And all of these kind of tools and frameworks sort of are interlinked and combined make a very powerful set of tools and ideas for innovation and successful transformation. from you dealing with this at a cultural level and at a leadership level, and others dealing with it at a very personal level. So interesting to see all of these different sort of concepts coming together. Just fantastic. The scholarship involved in it all. Okay, well, I don't know if there's anything that I haven't asked you, Jesper, that you think I should be asking you.
I'm just looking up my notes here, and there may be a little sort of anecdote why I also became such a strong believer in coaching, if that's okay.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So in SAP, they started a global graduate program, and that was really cool. I mean, it was the best of the best. But then when they came back to the market units, we were sort of having a bit difficulties how to make them successful.
Yeah.
And then I got some of the first ones, and they were like really clever young people, a great future, etc. I remember my first graduate. He was calling me maybe 20 times a day saying, Jesper, I have this question. What do you think? And then I answered him every time. Then I stopped, paused a little bit and say, okay, this is not developing him. This is just solving his problems. So we sat down and I said, going forward, when you have a challenge, you analyze it. You will be able to explain it to me in 1 minute. And then you will have 3 suggestions on how to solve it.
Okay.
So he was a little bit skeptic. So the next day he called me midday. He hadn't called me before, and I said, "Jesus!" I thought, "Jesus, did I scare him away?" But I didn't. Then he said, "Okay, Jesper, I have this challenge with a customer, and I think it could be A, B, or C." Then we spent 5 minutes on that and saying, "Could you combine these 3 methods, etc.?" Then he solved it. And then called me 2 hours later with a new challenge. So it was down from like 10, 20 calls per day to 2, 3 calls per day, quite rapidly. And then he stopped calling me, and I said, "What's happened?" "Yeah, but it's like I didn't want to disturb you, and I thought, with all this practice, I feel like I can answer my customers."
Yes.
So by investing more time up front, I saved a lot of time, and that person actually grew like this, almost exponential in development. So it's small, simple things that can do a big difference for people.
Yeah. And I mean that in itself is you're encouraging, I suppose, within I asked you what you meant by mindset at the very beginning, but it's encouraging people to develop their own mindset to how to reflect and how to look at problems and how to learn from that process rather than being told what to do.
Yes, I fully agree. So maybe I answered your question a little bit late, but that's exactly what, like we discussed in the beginning.
No, it's really interesting. So so the link between coaching as a tool for encouraging the right mindset is something that's a very powerful part of what you now do as a leader.
Yes.
Yeah. But
And
also now moving back into mentoring. It makes a sort of a logical conclusion to that.
Yeah. And I think it's good to have mentoring as well, because you can't coach everything. I mean, if you don't have the foundation to be coached on something, then you need to be mentored first, and then you can move into coaching later on.
Yeah. So I'm just kind of going back to the theme of your findings about why do companies not invest more in mindset development. It's making me think, is there anything more that we need to be doing as a company? Because we obviously do leadership development in order to raise the profile of mindset and importance in our work. I'm not sure. It's maybe a rhetorical question. Though I would like to say that on the Leadership Masters program, I mean, that really does get into mindset, doesn't it? I mean, it triggers so many questions. So we possibly address it through that supercharged sales leadership development program.
And that's actually what I loved about your program, is that it's not like an MBA. You don't get a reading list and here's a task you need to do. we needed to derive both a problem statement, what we wanted
Yeah.
to research, etc., and come with sort of recommendations. And that level of reflection I've never been
Yeah.
at before starting.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
It's the beautiful connection between sort of education and business, which you don't often see, which has encouraged that sort of creative thinking and growth mindset. And it's actually amazing to, for us to see how much people do transform themselves as they go through the journey. And like yourself, you've joined an elite group of managing directors now that have come through from sales, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
The statistics are not that good for people from sales to move into managing director roles. It's normally sort of CFOs or, people with an accounting background or manufacturing. So it's great to see people come into MD roles from a sales background. So yeah, you're at a very prestigious group, Jesper, with a few others, but it's growing. The numbers are growing, which I'm delighted about. Yeah.
But I think also the whole transformation, sort of like your program, that's also helping salespeople to think more strategically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that will be a help.
100%.
And I think also for many companies to have some diversity, not from a gender perspective, but from backgrounds. I mean, if we're all led by numbers, people, etc., but never by people who actually understand what we are selling and how we are positioning it out there.
Yeah.
Because if we can't sell it, then we can have the best product in the world, but it doesn't make a difference. So yeah, interesting.
That's true. Okay, well, I think we've got to the end of our podcast, Jesper. Thank you so much. It's been fantastic to have you with us. I hope we can get you back again at some future stage to talk about your future learnings in your new role, because I know you're quite, not been that many months in this new role now. You're obviously thoroughly enjoying it though. So hopefully you'll come back and join us. Yeah, so thank you.
Thanks a million, Phil, for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
It's a pleasure too. Yeah, thank you.
All the best.